Every single one of us was born with a nervous system designed not just to survive, but to discern, to adapt, to awaken to truth. And in this world, which often demands speed over stillness and attention over awareness, the most dangerous force is not always chaos, but deception. Deception in the form of people who have chosen to disconnect from truth, from conscience, and from growth. There are individuals among us who have not just lost their way, but who choose darkness as their compass. They wear the skin of reason and the smile of persuasion, but their core is hollowed out from years of evading truth. One of the most powerful faculties we possess is the prefrontal cortex, that seat of executive function, emotional regulation, and ethical reasoning. When it works in harmony with the limbic system and the autonomic nervous system, we become capable of true integrity. But when someone chooses to override this internal harmony repeatedly, they desensitize themselves to right and wrong. They become cold, calculated, strategic in their harm. That is not a glitch in their system. It is often an intentional rewiring. The first sign is this: they lie without hesitation, not to protect, not to survive, but to distort. Their lies are not always grand. Sometimes they are surgical, precise, and meant to create doubt, not clarity. Doubt in yourself, in others, in your perception of reality. Why? Because confusion is the soil where control takes root. Second, they lack empathy. The neural circuits responsible for mirroring another's pain, the same ones that light up when we witness suffering, are dimmed, often intentionally. These people don't just miss your pain, they dismiss it. And in that dismissal, they justify harm repeatedly. Third, they will never take ownership. If they hurt you, it's your fault. If they fail, you set them up. If you succeed, you're selfish. They weaponize guilt because when you carry it, you shrink. And when you shrink, they rise. But this isn't power. It's parasitism. True strength doesn't demand others become smaller. It expands so others can grow beside it. Fourth, they often appear magnetic, attractive, charismatic. But that charisma is not the overflow of joy or wisdom. It's a mask. A carefully constructed illusion to seduce trust, only to betray it when it's most vulnerable. They don't need your loyalty. They need your surrender. And finally, the most dangerous sign, they take pleasure in control. They create emotional instability, not because they're impulsive, but because it gives them leverage. Like a conductor of chaos, they orchestrate silence, distance, confusion, and conflict with strategic cruelty. They don't seek peace. They manufacture storms to remind you of their power. Now listen, this isn't about fear. It's about clarity. We are not called to hate these people, but we are called to recognize them. And we are called to protect what is sacred within us, our energy, our time, our purpose. Neuroscience teaches us that what we focus on, we strengthen. That includes people. So focus on what builds, not what breaks. Focus on what aligns, not what deceives. Persistent deception is not merely the occasional lie told to avoid discomfort or embarrassment. It is a pattern, ingrained, habitual, and intentional. It's the repeated and strategic manipulation of truth, used not as a last resort, but as a default operating mode. People who engage in persistent deception have moved far beyond self-protection. They use dishonesty as a tool for power, control, and self-interest. This kind of lying isn't always loud. It isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's woven so seamlessly into daily communication that it becomes nearly invisible to the untrained eye. But its effects neurologically, emotionally, and spiritually are deeply corrosive. From a neuroscientific standpoint, when someone lies repeatedly, especially without remorse, they start to rewire their own brain. Regions like the amygdala, which initially respond to lying with stress or discomfort, begin to show reduced activity over time with repeated falsehoods. In simpler terms, the more someone lies, the less guilty they feel about it. Their internal alarms grow quiet. The conscience is not destroyed all at once. It is silenced gradually, one dishonest choice at a time. This neuroplastic desensitization is one of the most disturbing traits of persistent deceivers. They not only lie to others, they become numb to the cost of lying, even to themselves. And what makes persistent deception especially sinister is that it often disguises itself as virtue. No, these individuals might present their lies as kindness. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you. Or they might appeal to loyalty. I'm only doing this to protect what we have. But underneath those rationalizations is a deeper truth. They are not trying to protect you. They are trying to control the narrative. Their goal is not connection. It's leverage. The The lie gives them an advantage. It creates a gap in understanding, and in that gap, they gain power. These deceivers are often incredibly skilled at mixing truth with fiction. They might tell you 90% of a story accurately, only to omit or alter the 10% that matters most. Why? Because full transparency would weaken their position. They want to appear honest without actually being honest. This creates cognitive dissonance in those around them. You begin to question your own instincts. You wonder if you're overreacting. You rationalize the inconsistencies. And that's exactly how deception works, not by force, but by erosion. It chips away at your clarity, your confidence, and eventually your identity. Moreover, persistent deception is not confined to what is said. It's also about what is withheld. Silence can be just as manipulative as speech. A deceiver might dodge direct answers, change the subject, or drown you in irrelevant details to obscure the truth. Their goal isn't simply to avoid being caught. It's to keep you off balance. The more uncertain you are, the more control they have. This isn't just psychological manipulation, it's physiological too. Chronic exposure to deceptive behavior can activate a state of hypervigilance in your nervous system. You begin to feel unsafe, but you can't quite explain why. That's the cost of being in the presence of persistent deceit. It's a slow, invisible unraveling of your inner peace. And yet, what makes this trait so difficult to confront is its subtlety. A persistent deceiver rarely admits to their manipulation. They might deflect, minimize, or even accuse you of being paranoid. They turn confrontation into confusion, accountability into attack. And the more they lie, the more invested they become in maintaining the lie. The deeper the web, the harder it is for them to backtrack. So instead, they double down. Recognizing persistent deception is not about catching someone in a single lie. It's about observing patterns over time. It's noticing the small contradictions, the missing pieces, the way conversations always seem to circle back to their advantage. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You cannot unsee it. Persistent deception is not just a moral failing. It is a deliberate corruption of truth. And the antidote to it is not matching manipulation with manipulation, but by standing firmly in clarity, grounded in discernment, and unwavering in integrity. Lack of empathy is not just an emotional void. It's a dangerous malfunction in the very system that connects humans to one another. Empathy is the biological and spiritual bridge that allows us to feel what others feel, to respond to suffering with care, and to act from a place of shared humanity. When someone lacks empathy, they're cut off from that bridge. They do not feel what others feel, and more critically, they do not want to. This absence doesn't always show up as violence or cruelty, or in many cases, it is subtle, quiet, and hidden beneath a mask of politeness or charm. But the effects are unmistakable. Cold, calculated decisions made without regard for human impact, and an inability to truly see or care for others beyond their utility. In neuroscience, the capacity for empathy is deeply tied to mirror neurons, cells in the brain that activate not just when we experience something ourselves, but when we observe someone else experiencing it. These neurons are the neurological basis of compassion. When a person cries and you feel a lump in your throat, that's empathy. When someone is in pain and you instinctively reach out to comfort them, your brain is mirroring their emotional state. But in those who lack empathy, this circuitry is impaired. It may still function technically, but it is overridden, either by narcissistic self-interest, emotional numbing, or years of internal justification that other people's pain simply does not matter. Someone who lacks empathy might not yell or rage. In fact, they can be composed, articulate, and even socially graceful. But when you look closer, there's a hollowness to their interactions. They don't listen. They wait for their turn to speak. They don't respond. They calculate. And when others are in pain, they might offer words, but those words are empty, rehearsed, without substance or true resonance. Over time, this becomes more visible. Their relationships lack depth. Their apologies, if they come at all, are transactional. Their concern is performative, not sincere. Performative, not sincere. They are moved by optics, not emotion. The most painful part about encountering someone with a true lack of empathy is not just the way they hurt others, but how indifferent they are to the harm they cause. You can explain your feelings, cry in front of them, express betrayal, and you will be met with either a blank stare, a defensive retort, or a rehearsed line meant to dismiss the entire moment. They might say You're too sensitive, or that's not what I meant, flipping the blame back on you without ever acknowledging your experience. This is not misunderstanding. It is willful ignorance, a refusal to validate the reality of another person because doing so would require the one thing they are missing, a heart aligned with conscience. People who lack empathy often see relationships through the lens of transaction. What can you give? How do you benefit them? Benefit them. Once you stop serving a purpose, the warmth they once offered disappears. You realize the connection was never about mutual care. It was about control, access, or validation. And when you try to express this, to appeal to something deeper in them, you find there is nothing there to reach. Their internal world is sealed off, protected by layers of ego, denial, and emotional detachment. Empathy is a muscle. It grows when exercised, and it atrophies when neglected. Some lose it through trauma and can rebuild it. But those who choose to suppress it over and over become spiritually and relationally bankrupt. They become people who do not just fail to comfort others, they fail to care that others even need comfort. That void affects every interaction they have. It's not just coldness, it's a rejection of what makes us human. To recognize a lack of empathy is to protect your nervous system from confusion and harm. Because when empathy is absent, the relationship is not reciprocal. It's a performance with only one actor. Fool. No longer you stay in that dynamic, the more you begin to question your own worth, your own feelings, your own clarity. But empathy isn't a luxury. It's a lifeline. And being in the presence of someone who lacks it is a slow, silent severing from your own emotional reality. Projection of blame is a deeply manipulative defense mechanism used by individuals who are unwilling to confront their own flaws, mistakes, or harmful behaviors. Instead of taking responsibility, they redirect guilt, fault, or error onto others, often the very people they've wronged. This is not a random or unconscious habit. In the case of consistently harmful individuals, blame projection becomes a pattern of psychological warfare. It allows them to maintain a self-image of superiority or innocence while destabilizing the emotional and mental clarity of those around them. When someone projects blame, they are essentially saying, I refuse to be accountable, so I will make you carry what belongs to me. The act itself is rooted in ego preservation. They cannot tolerate the discomfort that comes with guilt or introspection, so they push that discomfort outward. And in doing so, they rewrite the narrative. They are no longer the one who lied, cheated, or hurt someone. They are the victim misunderstood or attacked without cause. This reversal of roles isn't just dishonest. It is deeply abusive to anyone who genuinely seeks connection or resolution. From a psychological standpoint, projection is a defense mechanism first identified in psychoanalytic theory. It serves to protect the ego from the distress of facing one's own inadequacies or immoral behavior. But in toxic personalities, especially those with narcissistic or sociopathic traits, projection is not just protective, it is offensive. It is used as a weapon. When they are confronted with the truth, they twist it. When they are challenged, they counterattack. And often their projections are delivered with such confidence, such false conviction, that others begin to question themselves. This is where the true damage of blame projection lies, in its ability to create self-doubt in others. You might approach them to express hurt or confusion, expecting a conversation, but instead you're met with accusations. Suddenly you're being told that you caused the problem, you misunderstood, you are overreacting. The shift is fast and sudden, and because it triggers the natural human desire to reflect and self-correct, you might start wondering, did I really misread that? Was it my tone? Maybe I was too emotional. This is not just deflection. It is the intentional reversal of guilt, used to evade truth and control perception. In relationships, whether personal, professional, or familial, consistent blame projection erodes trust. It makes communication unsafe. Over time, it conditions others to suppress their feelings, to tiptoe around conflict, to carry guilt that doesn't belong to them. This dynamic creates emotional imbalance. One person becomes the scapegoat, the absorber of all tension, while the other continues unchallenged, protected by their unwillingness to look inward. What's particularly disturbing is that blame projectors often believe their own false narratives. They may not be lying in the conventional sense. They may be fully convinced that their distorted version of events is reality. That's what makes confronting them so difficult. You're not just battling dishonesty. You're confronting a deep psychological resistance to accountability. Logic doesn't reach them. Empathy doesn't sway them. Their need to be right or to remain unexposed overrides any genuine connection, even when evidence is clear, even when their actions are documented or undeniable. They may still find a way to spin the story. They may point to your reaction, your tone, your timing, anything to avoid the simple truth that they caused harm and refuse to own it. Recognizing projection of blame is essential to preserving your emotional clarity. When you see it for what it is, you stop internalizing false guilt. You start holding firm to your reality. You understand that another person's inability to own their actions is not your burden to carry. Blame is heavy, but only when it's yours. When it's not, the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to hold it. Let it fall where it belongs. Because in truth, maturity begins where projection ends, and healing begins when we stop accepting what was never ours to begin with. Charm, when used with sincerity, is a beautiful trait. It can create connection, ease social tension, and foster warmth. But in the hands of someone with manipulative intent, charm becomes a weapon, a strategic tool used not to connect, but to disarm. This form of charm is not rooted in genuine kindness or interest in others. It is calculated, it is rehearsed, and its goal is not relationship, but control. People who weaponize charm know how to read a room. They are hyper-aware of social dynamics, attentive to vulnerabilities, and skilled at mirroring what others want to see. They don't show you who they are. They reflect back to you who you wish they were. In the early stages of interaction, they can seem almost too perfect, attentive, engaging, complimentary. But this initial performance is not love. It's not friendship. It's bait. This kind of charm is particularly dangerous because it creates a false sense of safety. It disarms skepticism and lowers the defenses of others. You're drawn in not just because they seem likable, but because they seem to get you in a way few others do. They seem thoughtful, insightful, even vulnerable. But in reality, these traits are part of a crafted persona. The charm isn't spontaneous. It's targeted, and its purpose is to gain access to your trust, your loyalty, your resources, or your emotional energy. From a neurological perspective, our brains are wired to respond positively to social approval and pleasant interactions. When someone smiles at us, uses our name, offers praise, or maintains eye contact, it activates reward circuits in the brain. This makes us feel valued and connected. But someone who uses charm manipulatively exploits these systems. They hijack your brain's natural trust-building mechanisms to manufacture intimacy without any intention of honoring it. You feel bonded to them before you've had the chance to evaluate their character. Once trust is established, the mask begins to slip, but only slightly, and usually in moments where they test how much they can get away with. They might become passive-aggressive, dismissive, or even subtly cruel. But if you push back, they can immediately turn the charm back on, creating confusion. This hot and cold behavior keeps you off balance. You may even begin to blame yourself for their shift in behavior. Maybe I misunderstood, you think. Maybe they're just having a bad day. But the inconsistency is not accidental. It's part of the manipulation cycle. Charm is used to reel you back in the moment you begin to pull away. Those who weaponize charm are often deeply concerned with appearances. They care about how they are perceived, not who they truly are. Their charm often intensifies when there's an audience. They want to be admired, respected, and seen as admirable, not because they seek connection, but because they feed off control. And when they sense that someone sees through them, their demeanor changes rapidly. The charm disappears, replaced by coldness, contempt, or even hostility. Because to them, exposure is a threat. Charm is their shield. And when it fails, they attack. One of the hardest aspects of recognizing charm as manipulation is that it often feels good at first. It's validating, uplifting, even euphoric. You might want to hold on to it, to believe that the person really is who they appeared to be. But with time and reflection, patterns emerge. The kindness was conditional. The compliments served a purpose. The warmth vanished the moment you stopped being useful. True character is revealed in how someone acts when there is nothing to gain. When charm is used not as a reflection of character, but as a performance, it is not a gift. It is a trap. And when you realize that the person you trusted was only acting, the betrayal cuts deep. But clarity is power. And once you see that charm can be a weapon, you stop being disarmed by it. You begin to look deeper to listen more carefully, and to trust less quickly, because the desire for control, when taken to an unhealthy extreme, often transforms into a sinister source of pleasure for some individuals. This is not about natural leadership or responsible decision-making, but about a compulsive need to dominate others and orchestrate their environment in a way that ensures power remains firmly in their hands. The pleasure derived from control in such people is deeply rooted in psychological and neurological patterns that bind their sense of self-worth to their ability to manipulate and command, regardless of the cost to others. Like, control becomes a form of currency, an addictive substance that fuels their ego and validates their existence. It's not merely about managing situations. It's about bending others' realities to align with their will. The need to control others often arises from deep-seated insecurity and fear of vulnerability. By dominating those around them, they create an illusion of safety, masking their internal chaos with outward authority. This compulsion can manifest in many ways, through emotional manipulation, intimidation, strategic lies, or even subtle undermining of others' confidence. Each act of control reinforces their sense of power and, consequently, releases a rush of neurochemical rewards in the brain. Neurologically, the pleasure linked to control can be understood through the brain's reward circuitry, specifically the release of dopamine. When someone exerts control successfully, dopamine floods the system, producing feelings of pleasure and satisfaction. This biochemical reward loops back into the behavior, reinforcing it. Over time, controlling others becomes not just a behavior, but a neurological compulsion. The more control they exercise, the more pleasure they derive, creating a cycle that is difficult to break. This cycle also explains why such individuals often escalate their behavior, moving from subtle manipulation to more overt domination. Moreover, those who find pleasure in control tend to view others as extensions of themselves rather than independent beings with their own rights and emotions. This objectification strips away empathy and compassion, reducing relationships to power dynamics. The people around them become chess pieces, tools to be moved, sacrificed, or leveraged for gain. This mindset disconnects them from the natural human experience of mutual respect and shared vulnerability. Instead, they thrive in environments where fear, dependence, and uncertainty give them the upper hand. The emotional landscape of those who seek control is often marked by an underlying tension and restlessness. While exerting control may provide temporary relief or satisfaction, it does not heal the internal wounds that drive this need. Rather, it amplifies them. Because true security does not come from dominance, it comes from connection, trust, and acceptance. Those who rely on control for pleasure are caught in a paradox. They push others away, even as they desperately try to hold on to them, using fear and manipulation as misguided anchors. Their pleasure and control also manifests in the suffering or discomfort of others. It is not uncommon for them to derive satisfaction from watching others struggle, doubt themselves, or feel powerless. This is not sadism in the crude sense, but a subtle, often hidden reinforcement of their own superiority. Each moment of another's weakness is perceived as a triumph. This dynamic creates toxic environments where emotional abuse festers and victims are trapped in cycles of intimidation and submission. Recognizing this behavior requires deep awareness and boundary setting. The allure of control can be seductive because it often comes wrapped in confidence and decisiveness, but it is important to distinguish between healthy leadership and pleasure-driven domination. Healthy leadership uplifts and empowers others. It builds trust and fosters growth. Pleasure and control, on the other hand, erodes autonomy and fractures relationships. Breaking free from the influence of someone who derives pleasure from control requires reclaiming your own agency and refusing to participate in the cycle. It means seeing through the manipulation and choosing boundaries that protect your integrity. It means recognizing that no one has the right to orchestrate your emotions or your life for their own gratification. At its core, the pleasure and control is a signal, a red flag that points to deeper wounds and disconnections within the person who wields it. It reminds us that power, when divorced from compassion and respect, becomes a poison. And it calls on us to cultivate environments where true power is expressed not through dominance, but through empathy, authenticity, and mutual empowerment. Resistance to growth is a hallmark of individuals who are fundamentally opposed to change, not just external change, but the internal transformation necessary for self-awareness and improvement. No. This resistance is not simply about discomfort with new ideas or experiences. It is a deeper, more profound refusal to engage in the difficult process of self-reflection, accountability, and evolution. For these individuals, growth represents a threat to their carefully constructed identity, to the narratives they tell themselves about who they are and why they behave the way they do. At a neurological level, growth requires the brain to form new neural pathways, to challenge existing beliefs, and to tolerate uncertainty. This process activates areas involved in discomfort and cognitive conflict, such as the anterior cingulate cortex. For someone resistant to growth, these signals become aversive, triggering defensive reactions designed to preserve the status quo. Rather than embracing discomfort as a pathway to development, they suppress it, often through denial, deflection, or projection. This creates a mental rigidity, a narrowing of perspective that shields them from confronting uncomfortable truths about themselves. Such resistance manifests in various behaviors. They dismiss feedback even when it is constructive and well-intentioned. They reject new information that contradicts their worldview or threatens their ego. When confronted with mistakes or harmful behaviors, they deflect responsibility or blame others. They may also use manipulation to maintain control over their environment, avoiding situations that could challenge their self. This resistance is not a passive trait. It is active and persistent, often reinforced by a deep fear of vulnerability and failure. Emotionally, resistance to growth is tied to a fear of losing control. Change requires relinquishing familiar patterns and admitting imperfection, which can be profoundly unsettling. For some, maintaining the illusion of infallibility or superiority is essential to their identity. Growth threatens that illusion, exposing flaws and insecurities they are unwilling to face. The consequence is a defensive posture that stifles dialogue, closes off empathy, and erodes authentic relationships. People who resist growth often isolate themselves emotionally, building walls to protect their fragile self-image. On a spiritual or philosophical level, resistance to growth represents a stagnation of the soul. Growth is not just a psychological process. It is a vital aspect of human flourishing and alignment with higher principles, such as truth, humility, and compassion.
Even when someone refuses to grow, they deny themselves the opportunity to connect more deeply with themselves and others.
They remain trapped in cycles of repetition, unable to break free from destructive patterns. This stagnation is often marked by bitterness, resentment, and a growing sense of emptiness. The impact of resistance to growth extends beyond the individual. It affects families, communities, and workplaces by creating toxic dynamics where change is feared and progress is hindered. Attempts to foster growth in these environments can be met with hostility or sabotage. A resistant individual may undermine initiatives, spread doubt, or create conflict to protect their position. This not only stalls collective development, but also spreads emotional fatigue and confusion among those who seek genuine transformation. Recognizing resistance to growth is crucial for maintaining personal boundaries and mental health. It requires discernment to see when someone is unwilling to engage honestly with themselves and others. It means understanding that their resistance is not a reflection of your worth or the validity of growth itself, but a defense mechanism rooted in fear and insecurity. Engaging with such individuals demands patience and clarity, but it also requires limits. Knowing when to step back and protect your own evolution from being stifled. Ultimately, resistance to growth reveals the deeper human struggle between comfort and change, ego and humility, stagnation and transformation. It challenges us to cultivate resilience and grace, both for ourselves and for those who have yet to embrace the path of growth. Because growth is not just about improvement, it is about becoming fully alive, fully present, and fully connected to the highest aspects of our humanity. When resistance is met with unwavering commitment to truth and integrity, it can become the catalyst for profound awakening rather than permanent stagnation. Spiritual desensitization is a subtle yet profound phenomenon that occurs when an individual becomes numb to the deeper, more meaningful aspects of existence. It is a gradual erosion of sensitivity to values like compassion, humility, and connectedness, which are foundational to a vibrant and authentic human experience. This desensitization is not simply a loss of religious faith or ritual. It is a diminished capacity to engage with the sacredness in life, whether that sacredness is understood through spirituality, morality, or a sense of purpose beyond oneself. At its core, spiritual desensitization reflects a disconnection from the inner compass that guides ethical behavior and emotional resonance. When a person becomes spiritually desensitized, they lose the ability to feel genuine remorse, gratitude, or empathy. These feelings, which connect us to others and to something greater than ourselves, are dulled. The person may still intellectually understand what is right or wrong, but the emotional and moral weight of these concepts no longer moves them. This disconnection can result in behaviors that harm others without the usual checks of conscience. Neurologically, this condition can be seen as a blunting of the neural circuits associated with emotional processing and moral reasoning. Areas such as the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which integrates emotion with decision-making, become less active or less connected to other brain regions responsible for empathy and ethical judgment. Over time, repeated exposure to harmful actions, selfish motives, or moral compromises can desensitize these pathways, making it easier for an individual to act without regard for the impact of their behavior on others or on themselves. This spiritual numbness often manifests as apathy or cynicism towards suffering and injustice. The person may witness pain or wrongdoing, but respond with indifference or justification rather than compassion. They may rationalize cruelty, selfishness, or deceit as necessary or even deserved, eroding the social fabric of trust and kindness. This lack of spiritual sensitivity not only isolates the individual, but also harms communities by fostering environments where harm is minimized or ignored. On a deeper level, spiritual desensitization is a defense mechanism. It can arise from trauma, repeated disappointment, or chronic stress, situations where the psyche protects itself by shutting down emotional responsiveness to avoid pain. While this numbing may offer temporary relief, it comes at the cost of long-term spiritual and emotional impoverishment. The individual sacrifices the richness of connection, meaning, and moral engagement for a hollow form of self-preservation. In many cases, this desensitization is linked to a distorted sense of self that prioritizes ego and control over vulnerability and authenticity. When spiritual awareness fades, the person often becomes more self-centered and less capable of recognizing the interconnectedness of all life. Their actions may be driven by immediate gratification or power rather than by principles that transcend the self. This shift can manifest as manipulation, exploitation, or disregard for others, all symptomatic of a heart that has been closed off to the spiritual dimension of life. Spiritual desensitization also interferes with the ability to experience awe, wonder, and gratitude, emotions that open the heart and mind to transcendence. Without these experiences, life becomes flat, transactional, and devoid of deeper joy. The world is reduced to a series of mechanical interactions rather than a dynamic interplay of meaning and purpose. This existential dullness can fuel further moral disengagement and emotional detachment, creating a vicious cycle that deepens the spiritual void. Healing from spiritual desensitization requires intentional re-engagement with the inner self and the world around us. It involves cultivating practices that restore sensitivity, mindfulness, meditation, acts of kindness, and honest self-reflection. It demands courage to face vulnerability and the willingness to embrace discomfort as part of growth. When a person begins to reconnect with their spiritual core, they start to feel again the pain, the joy, the responsibility toward others. This awakening rekindles the moral compass and revives the capacity for empathy and compassion. Ultimately, spiritual desensitization is not a fixed state, but a signal, a call to awaken from numbness and reclaim the fullness of human experience. It reminds us that our spiritual lives are intimately tied to our emotional and moral lives, and that neglecting one dims the others. By recognizing this subtle but dangerous erosion, we can take conscious steps toward healing, restoring our connection to ourselves, to others, and to the greater mysteries that give life its profound meaning. Spiritual desensitization is a silent thief of our deepest humanity, stripping away the very qualities that bind us to one another and to the greater purpose of life. But it is not an irreversible fate. See, the power to awaken, to feel deeply once more, and to reclaim the sacred within lies within each of us. It demands courage to face discomfort, to embrace vulnerability, and to reconnect with the truths that nurture our souls. When we choose to resist numbness and nurture our spiritual sensitivity, we not only heal ourselves, but also restore the light of compassion, empathy, and meaning in the world around us. Remember, the richness of life is found not in detachment, but in wholehearted engagement with ourselves, with others, and with the divine mystery that calls us to be more than we are. This awakening is not just a possibility, it is an imperative.